A new hope has dropped. After the attempts at sabotaging the Nintendo Switch 2 launch have completely failed, the game journals and the analysts are bending over backwards to find something new to complain about. So they can't complain about the hardware, they can't complain about Mario Kart World, they can't complain about Nintendo's performance as a whole, so they have to resort to their old standby. Trust me, bro. Like, I have a source at a third-party developer who says that the sales for our game are lower than we possibly anticipated. You know, you have a lot of known analysts on Twitter, people like ZugiX, like pushing this line of thought, pushing this idea that, like, no, all of these third-party games are massively underperformed. Nobody's buying third-party games on Switch 2. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, what third-party games? Like, what has come out on Nintendo Switch 2 that would encourage people to buy, like, a day one release? Everything that the major third parties put out was an old port or a broken, unfinished game. The big third party game that the industry tried to sell you on was Cyberpunk, and that had nothing to do with the Switch 2, but more out of a desperate attempt to try and damage control CD Projekt Red, which is probably the most woke, active, relevant gaming studio in the world right now. Journalists pushed Cyberpunk, over much better games like Street Fighter 6 or Fantasy Life 2 or Fast Fusion Neo, and they're complaining about the alleged sales of other ports, and I do need to come out here and say alleged, because everything I've seen, over the past couple of days seems to indicate that games like Street Fighter 6 and Fantasy Life 2 are actually doing pretty well, okay? I have seen no indication that, major third-party releases on Nintendo Switch 2 have failed. It's just not something I've seen personally. I'm sure there are a handful of games that aren't relevant or talked about. Deltarune is a good example. But this idea that nobody's buying any games on Switch 2. It's just a gigantic cope, and obviously so. But they can't damage control the hardware sales. They can't damage control the software sales for Nintendo's first-party titles. So they have to kind of cope and seethe by hyperfixating on this alleged claim, this narrative that Nintendo Switch 2 underperforms when it comes to third-party games. It's just so laughable and so out of touch, especially because this is probably the strongest third-party launch we've had in a very, very, very long time. Actually, probably ever, honestly. But seeing these people just try and desperately keep the narrative towards Nintendo negative, it's just not gonna work. I do think that anybody who's remotely familiar with the Switch 2 can just go on the eShop right now and see that I can buy Raito, or I can buy Street Fighter 6 or Fantasy Life 2. There's just all these there's just all these options for third party games. But the community desperately doesn't want that to be known. The Switch 2 is a console that is competitive with the PS5 and the Series X, because once third-party gamers make the jump over to Nintendo consoles, it's pretty much over for PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and mobile. And the industry knows that and is doing everything it possibly can to kind of protect their interests and keep these inferior gaming studios artificially talked about and relevant. There was no excuse, there was no reason for Cyberpunk 2077 to be seen as the big third-party launch game on Nintendo Switch 2, right? It didn't deserve it. It's glitchy, it's unfinished, it's not a good game at all, and yet we're supposed to believe that this was some masterpiece of a game because CD Projekt Red worked on it. There's just it's just pathetic. It's just downright sad. You can look at the bestsellers list on Nintendo Switch 2 actually on the eShop right now and see that there are quite a few third-party games in the top 10, right? It's just kind of remarkable. So, like, I don't know if, like, there actually is a source at some third-party developer, like, claiming this, but, like, I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that it's not true. Like, what do you mean, like, games aren't selling well on Switch 2? You know, like, like, do you mean that they're not selling as well as Mario Kart? Like, Grand Theft Auto doesn't sell as well as Mario Kart, you know? So, like, I'm just sitting here, like, thinking to myself that, like, these guys are just coping. They're just seething. They're trying everything they possibly can to downplay this console and downplay every major game that comes down to it. And, like, I have to wonder, like, when people are going to wake up, because, like, people have, like, you know, become red pilled on, like, the first party Nintendo games. They're beginning to become red pilled on, like, the hardware. But, like, when it comes to third party releases, you know, I think for a long time the giant cope is going to be, it actually always has been, this idea that, like, third party games do way better on PlayStation and Xbox because those are the real video game consoles. So, like, I'm really curious, like, how long that narrative is going to continue when, like, you know, anyone who's serious about this hobby is primarily playing Mario Kart or Donkey Kong Bonanza, you know. If you're the sort of person who's, like, gooning over Stellar Blade or, like, hyping up Astrobot or whatever, like, I don't take you seriously. I don't respect you. You know, like, it's just, that's just the reality of that situation. And, like, I really wonder, like, how long this is going to keep up before people start noticing the patterns. Like, because this happens every console generation, where every single time these people come crawling out of the woodwork and try to say Nintendo is doomed. And it does need to be pointed out that these people's jobs are not to analyze the industry and to actually, like, report on trends. Like, their job is to downplay Nintendo and their successes and their games and their hardware. And you can see this in just how they react when it comes to these kinds of situations, because they're not excited about the Switch launch. They're not, like, you know, excited about reporting on which game is doing well and, like, and things of that nature. Like, no. Like, what they want to tell you is that third-party games are failing on Nintendo Switch 2, and that really demonstrates their mindset when talking about this console. They want to steer you onto alternative platforms. And this is very observable if you pay any amount of attention to these people at all. And I do think going forward that, like, the community really does need to rally and start condemning these narratives before they can take hold. I'm sure there are plenty of games on Switch 2 that haven't done well, but that's true for every single video game platform ever made. It's just the nature of that industry. As a whole, the Switch 2 launch has been extraordinarily successful, but the gaming analyst community cannot bring itself to admit it.